In football, oftentimes the majority of praise will either go to head coaches, GMs, or players. But what about the owners of the teams that help build the roster and help build the organization? For the Lions, Sheila Hamp definitely is a big part of this and often is an unsung hero of the team. We're going to talk about it in this episode, folks, so stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, old Detroit Lions fans, and welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and as always, we're diving on in. But before we do so, again, I want to make sure I give you guys a quick announcement, a quick reminder that this Thursday, June 13th at 3855 Lapeer Road in Flint, Michigan, from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the Rent-A-Center building that is at that address, there is going to be a 50% off select items in store. There is also going to be a penny down starts any new agreement of any item of your choice within the store. There's going to be free food, there's going to be music, there's going to be games. It's going to be a great community event. There's going to be great deals for you guys there. Don't want to miss it. Make sure you're there. And with that being said, we're going to now dive into the actual content. So, here's the thing, folks. When we talk about football, when we talk about football teams, organizations, usually when we're talking about teams of that nature, we're usually thinking about almost instantaneously big-time players that are a part of the team. We're talking about head coaches. We're talking about GMs. We're talking about extremely prominent figures that are usually out in the media. They're usually out and available every single day. And those are the people that usually get the majority of the fanfare. They're usually the ones that get the majority of the credit for when things go right. However, the flip side of that coin is they're usually also the ones that get the majority of the blame when things go wrong. Well, when you think about it, let's talk about the Detroit Lions here. The Lions over the last 3 years have become a prime example for quick turnarounds in the NFL because we have to understand just how quick, how just absolutely crazy the turnaround has been here in Detroit, considering the long history that has been the Detroit Lions over the last, 4 or 5 decades. The Lions have been a team that has just never been able to seemingly able to figure it out, pardon me. And when you think about how quick the Lions have turned things around over the last 3 years, it's definitely one that the NFL world has paid very close attention to, and it's now become kind of like a standard, if you will, for like, hey, if you want to have a quick turnaround, you want to have a efficient and effective turnaround, you need to take a look at what the Lions have done. Well, when we talk about the turnaround in general, many have spoken to players like, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jared Goff, Aiden Hutchinson, Penei Sewell, and a whole bunch of other big-time pieces that are of this organization that have really fostered that growth. And if it's not the players that I just mentioned, of which there are several, there's definitely more than the ones I just mentioned, then we start talking about guys like GM Brad Holmes, who has been known as a brilliant genius GM in the entirety of the NFL, who has built a roster and maintained that roster over the last couple of years to turn the team into what it is right now. And if it's not GM Brad Holmes, then they're also talking about head coach Dan Campbell, who has an absolutely superb, strong leadership style that has resulted in a deep, rich culture in Detroit that, if we think about it, has often been missing from the Detroit Lions over the last, as I said, 4 or 5 decades. But the one person who has been overlooked quite often to those that are outside of the organization, and I would even say to some within the local fan base, is Sheila Hamp, the owner of the Detroit Lions. Now, to be fair, most fans and people that are in the NFL, they don't necessarily think of owners as, being part of the whole process. They usually just kind of look at owners as, very rich individuals that have purchased the team. They either are a fan of the team or they're just looking to buy they're trying to be a part of the NFL by purchasing a team, whatever the case might be. They don't normally think of owners as a huge part of the process as to how a team becomes successful. And let's be entirely honest. When you start thinking about owners nowadays, you usually don't think of owners unless they're notorious for something. Guys like Dan Snyder or Jerry Jones, things like that, which are usually, as again, when they were either in, as was the case with Dan Snyder or as the current cases with Jerry Jones, they're not necessarily known for good things anymore. They're kind of now known for negative things or things that have a bit of a mixed bag sort of feeling or vibe to it. But when it comes to Sheila, despite dropping the name Ford as part of her family name, because she used to be Sheila Ford Hamp, now she's just Sheila Hamp. She dropped that part of her name. That name, the Ford name, has long had a negative connotation and connection to the team of the Detroit Lions and to the city of Detroit. It has been a name that, well, let's be fair and honest here. I know some Lions fans would probably hope I would forget this, but I'm a historical mind by nature. I have a history degree from college. You cannot just simply erase the past because you no longer want to acknowledge it. Let's just call it for what it is. For a long time, there were fans that wanted the Ford family to sell the team to get the hell out of Detroit and did not ever want to think about the Ford family anymore because all they thought the Ford family was interested in was making money. They were not interested in the team being successful. All they thought they were interested in was in the Ford Motor Company and making money. Well, now we take a look at the current situation for what it is with Sheila. Sheila, as we know, is the daughter of William Clay Ford and Martha Firestone Ford. And her story and her roots with the Detroit Lions, it runs deep. I mean, for crying out loud, if we realistically want to be fair about it, Sheila's roots with the Detroit Lions pretty much almost have been there for her entire life. As Lions fans already know about Sheila, her father purchased the team, that's William Clay Ford. He purchased the team on November 22nd, 1963. That's a pretty ominous date for a lot of people. There's a reason why that date has remained in, the lore of the Detroit Lions fandom, because that was the date that JFK was assassinated. And a lot of people have kind of, associated that date with the kind of the ominous factor of the Ford family buying the team. However, even though that was the date that the team was officially purchased by William Clay Ford did not officially take over of the team until January of 1964. Either way, that's just splitting hairs. But we have to understand something here. From the time of the purchase and the control, the takeover of the Ford family for the Lions to the current date, there's been very little that the Lions have done that has made the fan base, happy or jubilant. Because, again, I'm a historical mind. And I always look at dates, I always look at numbers, I always look at evidence, raw data, whatever the case is, to try and make my argument more clear here. So I was like, okay, let's take a look at this. What is the track record of William Clay Ford and Martha Firestone Ford, so husband and wife, over their time of being the principal owners of the team, versus what Sheila's done? So, okay, William Clay Ford was the owner from 1964 until 2013. The reason I don't include 2014 is because he died before the season got started. So from 2014 to 2019, Martha Firestone was in charge of the team. So from 1964 to 2019 is when William Clay Ford and Martha were in charge. During that time frame, the Lions had 55 seasons of football. Of those 55 seasons, they only had 21 seasons that were considered winning seasons, so 500 or better in terms of win percentage. That's literally only 38.2% of the time, folks. Of that entire time, the Lions had literally 13 playoff games that they were that they were a part of. They only had one playoff victory. So think about that. 13 playoff games, but only one playoff victory from 1964 to 2019. That means we won literally 7.8% of the time in the playoffs underneath William Clay Ford and Martha Firestone. And out of the 55 seasons that they were in charge, we only had 3 division titles. That's only 5.5% of the time. And we had one NFC Conference Championship game appearance. That was in 1991, which is also the last time and the only time that with William Clay Ford and Martha Firestone that we had an actual playoff victory. And the overall record, as far as regular season record, under William Clay Ford and Martha Firestone was 355 wins to 491 losses with 14 ties. That's a win percentage, folks, of .420. So pretty much what I'm trying to point out there is that under Mr. Ford and Mrs. Ford, the Lions were not very good. If at anything, the best you could describe them was mediocre. And that was a practice that continued for virtually the entirety of their 5 years in charge of the Lions. Then we take a look of their daughter, which is Sheila. Take a look at what she's done over the last 4 years, because we have 2020, 21, 22, 23. She's now going into her fifth year in 2025. In the last 4 years, she's had 2 winning seasons of 500 or better. That's 50%, substantially better than her parents. She's got 2 playoff wins versus 3 playoff games that she's been in, a 66.6 win percentage rate in the playoffs. She's got 1 division title over the last 4 years being in charge of the team, 25%, substantially better than her parents. And she has an overall record of 29, 37, and 1 with a win percentage in the regular season of .440. Again, better than her parents. The only thing that her parents match her with so far is the fact that they have 1 NFC Conference Championship game appearance. However, though, let's put that in perspective. 1964 to 1991 was the length and gap of how long it took Mr. Ford as the owner to get to a conference championship game. It literally took Sheila only 4 years in comparison. So again, Sheila has shown that as the owner, she has been able to get a lot more results in her short period of time compared to her mother and her father. But why am I bringing all this up? Well, here's the reason why. Because the question that one has to ask ourselves is, what truly separates Sheila from her parents, besides the overall performance, besides what we already know just on face value? And the best way I can put it is this. There was an article that was released in the Detroit News. It was released a couple of days ago, but I completely overlooked it. I didn't even know it existed until last night. But once I did, I was like, dude, this is a great article. If you can find it, it's on the internet. You guys can read it. There's no paywalls or anything like that. But it's an awesome article that talks about Sheila and kind of like how she, over the last couple of years, has taken over this process of transforming the Lions. And one of the biggest reasons about how that transformation has taken place is because of her interaction and attitude towards the team, being the owner of the team, versus what her parents were. And again, I'm not trying to sound down on Mr. Ford or Mrs. Ford. I'm just simply saying there is a clear dichotomy, if you will, between how her parents interacted with the team versus how she's interacted with the team. And I've talked about this multiple times in the past in previous segments. Some of those have been taken down because they were on my old channel. Other times I've talked about them earlier on. But the point of the matter is that when you had William Clay Ford and you had Martha, they more looked at the team as kind of like a secondary point of interest over the majority of the 55 years that they were in charge. Because again, William Clay Ford was in charge of the team for 49 years, from 1964 to 2013. Martha was in charge of the team for 6 years, from 14 to 19, and Sheila's been in charge of it now for almost 5 years, but pretty much the last 4 years. Well, let's think about it here. William Clay Ford, when he purchased the team in 1964, he was still a big part of the Ford Motor Company. In fact, Mr. Ford was on the Ford Motor Company's design committee as the chairman of that group from 1957 until 1989, and he still remained on the board of directors until 2005. So even though he was the owner of the Detroit Lions, he still had a massive part of the Ford Motor Company. My point is this, is that Mr. Ford, William Clay Ford, he may have been a fan of the Detroit Lions. That may have been part of the reason why he purchased the Lions back in 1963 and took over for them in 1964. But I think based upon his actions, based upon the fact that he also had a strong holding in, the Ford Motor Company itself, is that it seemed to him that the Ford Motor Company was more his top priority and that the Lions were kind of like a secondary priority where it was like, hey, this is kind of like my pet project, this is kind of like what I do for fun, but my actual top priority is the Ford Motor Company. And I think the perception that a lot of Lions fans had was that he kind of looked at that Mr. Ford looked at the Lions kind of more of a business transaction rather than anything else. And that is kind of what stirred a lot of animosity from Lions fans over the last, 20, 30 years as far as the perception and view as what the Fords thought of the Lions rather than what Lions fans thought of the Lions. But however, though, we get to Sheila here. Sheila, when she grew up, she knew nothing else really except the Lions. The Lions were her whole life. And she absolutely loved them. She loved the sport. And she wanted to see not only the Lions successful, but she wanted to be a part of them. Again, I've talked about Sheila's, her youth. I've talked about how she grew up. I've talked about what made her into the woman that she became. Again, I'll go down the laundry list here really quickly, but she was the first female to go through an all-female class at Yale, an Ivy League school that up until the point that she went was all male. There had never been any females that had gone through the college. That's pretty damn important right there. That is a huge point of success. That's a huge point of recognition for her. She was a female Michigan State tennis champion when she was in high school. She was the female captain of the Yale tennis team when she went to Yale. You're talking about a very competitive, very driven, very tough, very resilient woman. And on top of that, like I said, she always wanted to work in the NFL. She went to her father and said, listen, I want to work in the NFL. Well, her father was friends with the commissioner at the time, which was Pete Rozelle. She went to Pete Rozelle, asked for a job in the NFL, and, well, unfortunately, because of the society that was back in those days, Pete Rozelle said he couldn't think of a single job for her. So she had to wait a very long time until she could actually start working in the NFL, before she could actually start having something to do with the Lions. In the meantime, while she waited, she raised her family, she, coached Little League Soccer, she went about her everyday normal life. But the thing about it is like I said, she always had a fandom of the Lions. She always loved the Lions because, again, she went to games. The Detroit Lions games used to be played at Tiger Stadium. She used to go to games with her father at Tiger Stadium. She used to go to training camps in West Bloomfield Hills back when they used to hold their training camps back there, not at Allen Park. Or also at SVSU. That was way back in the early 2000s. But my whole point is this. She's been with the Lions ever since the beginning. And what makes and made Sheila different from her parents is that she is fully invested into the Lions. She cares very deeply about the welfare of the team and the relation and the connection that the team has with the city. The article that I'm specifically referring to that's on Detroit News really highlights this very deeply. Because you have to think about it. When you start taking a look at what Sheila has done ever since she took over as the principal owner in June of 2020, she made quite a lot of drastic changes. First and foremost, she dropped the Ford name. That was a very powerful symbolic gesture that she made to the fans because it was like, listen, she'd always been Sheila Ford Hamp up until that point. But when she took over, she decided to say, I'm going to drop the Ford name and I'm just going to be known as Sheila Hamp. Pretty big symbolic gesture there. Number 2, after she fired Quinn and Patricia in November of 2020, she then decided that she was going to move her office from this corner office that used to have all these windows. It looked over the practice field and everything. She moved it to a windowless conference room that was down the hall where all the freaking powers that were in the organization were, meeting. Whether it was, Rod Wood, whether it was, Chris Spielman, and then when she eventually hired, Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, their offices moved down there. She decided that she was going to be right in the middle of the action. She was not going to be some owner that was off in some other part of the building or had very little interaction with the organization. She's like, no, I'm going to be right in the middle of this. I'm going to make sure that I know exactly what's going on. Not necessarily dictating what she wanted, but she was going to be a part of the team. And then, again, talking about the whole hiring process of Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, she was right there in the hiring process, having meetings with Barry Sanders, Chris Spielman, Rod Wood, figuring out who was going to be the best men to run the team, whether the GM or the head coach. And then one of the great things that was from the article was in the very beginning of the article, there is a part where it talks about how in Sheila's office, she has this picture that is framed, and it's from Chris Spielman. And in the drawing that Chris Spielman gave her, he has 3 things that are specifically listed about what makes the Lions the way they are. About having leadership, about having culture, about having the staff be the most important thing. And literally, he also has in there the phrase, stay focused on this. And that's referring to all 3 of those things I just mentioned. And he has it underlined 4 separate times. What Sheila did is she listened to the counsel, she listened to the advice of those that were in the organization, and she took that to heart, and she has made that the bedrock principle of how the Lions are going to be. And I'm going to read some quotes here that really kind of explain how Sheila is very different. She's very She's very much a down-to-earth kind of individual. She's not some owner that's off in a foreign land or a foreign concept. She is right there in the middle of it. Listen to this quote. She says, "It's got to be the right people and the right people fitting together. Football is the ultimate team sport, and we have a real team. Nobody is me first. I think we are built to last." That last phrase right there is exceedingly important. Nobody is me first. I think we're built to last. There's no egos. Think about that right there. No egos allowed. Sheila has said that the Lions are an egoless team. Well, think about some of the things that are mentioned in that article. It's mentioned about how Dan Campbell, he does Zoom calls on Tuesday with the Ford family. He answers any questions that they have. He goes over film review with them. Chris Spielman also answers questions, and he interacts with the maintenance crews of Ford Field. He interacts with the marketing staffs as well. Everybody has a role, but they all don't think that they're more important than somebody else. They all work with a common goal in mind, with a common purpose in mind. How do we get the Lions better? Nobody's better than anybody else. We all have a role that we have to play, and we all have one singular purpose in mind. Let the Lions be successful. Let's get to a Super Bowl. And again, Sheila had more quotes. And again, I love these quotes because they really show the heart of who Sheila is in regards to the Lions. Here's another quote about how what she describes as the noble cause of the Detroit Lions. She says, she was talking about how when she was working with a CEO at the time, kind of, working for him before she took over as the owner of the Detroit Lions, she says, "Define your noble cause." The noble cause was the city of Detroit, the fans. The fans that have been with us for so long with not much success. And, both Chris and Brad and Dan were totally into it. Dan played here. He loves the city. And that's kind of where it all began. Again, you're talking about how Sheila really understands that, hey, the city of Detroit is all about freaking being authentic. It's all about, hey, you're all in. You are giving everything you have. It's a blue-collar town. It's an automotive town. We don't take very kindly to people who try to put on facades or fake faces or try to feign interest. It's like, listen, we want the genuine article. We want people who actually care about the city of Detroit and actually care about the fans and the team. And again, Sheila highlights it even further. And I love the way she describes this. This was why I put this as the thumbnail image. She said, "I think of myself as a steward of the Lions. The team belongs to the city of Detroit, and Detroit is a football town for sure. If we could actually put together a winning organization for our fans, for the city, it would really be something." And that's turned out to be the case. Again, heavy emphasis on one phrase in there. She's talking about the team belongs to the city of Detroit and that Detroit is a football town for sure. She owns the team, but she highlights it there, right there at the very beginning. The team belongs to the city of Detroit. That's why she calls herself, "I see myself as a steward." Yeah, she's the owner of the team. But you know what? The team belongs to the city of Detroit. She's just owning it. She's just taking care of it. She's just a steward. The city of Detroit actually owns the Detroit Lions. They belong here in Detroit. That's the right approach. That's the right mindset. That's why Sheila has been able to make the drastic changes with hiring the right guys who have made the right moves, that have made everything that have transpired to this point to make the Lions the way they are. I've said it before. I'll say it again now. It all starts at the top. If everything starts at the top correctly, it's going to work all the way on down to the freaking smallest group. If you've got everything working right at the top, everything's going to work all the way down to the bottom. Sheila made the right approach, made the right mindset, the right attitude. Hey, I'm going to take counsel. I'm going to take all these different people's viewpoints, and I'm not going to demand anything. I want to hear what's the best approach, the best mindset to get to what I want, which is to have a successful winning organization for the city of Detroit, for the fans of the Detroit Lions. And it's very interesting how only 3 years for the Detroit Lions, ever since they hired Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, since the 4 years that she's taken over as the owner of the Detroit Lions, we're now in the case that we are. Because Sheila did something that very few owners actually are willing to do. Step back and say, hey, I might own the team, but I need to listen to other people so that way I have the best informed decision to make the right move so that way this team can be successful. That's what Sheila did. And that's why I say she is an unsung hero of the Detroit Lions, because everybody wants to talk about Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. But I'll tell you this right now. Sheila, Chris Spielman, and the rest of them that are up there in the organization, they deserve every amount of praise and, fandom that freaking Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell get. But anyway, I just wanted to talk about this because I believe that she definitely needs more recognition, and I wanted to make sure I took some time to do that with today's episode. But I feel I've now ended the episode. I feel now I've gotten to the end of the episode, so I'm going to say thank you all for watching another one of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all to do one of these three things: like, comment, and subscribe. If by chance you subscribed in the past and forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and you not had a chance to do so, again, highly encourage y'all to subscribe. But I also encourage y'all, please, to make sure you turn on that bell notification icon as well, so that way you guys never miss any more content that I push out. I also encourage y'all, please, to share the content with your Lions friends and family members. Share it here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere you can. The more we can share it, the greater the reach, the greater the growth of the channel, and that's what we truly are looking for here with this channel. And with that being said, I once again want to remind you all, again, this upcoming Thursday, June 13th at 3855 Lapeer Road in Flint, Michigan, from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the Rent-A-Center store at that address, there is going to be a 50% off of select items in the store. It's a great deal, folks. You don't want to miss it. And on top of that, there's another great deal. There's going to be penny down starts on any new agreement on any item of your choice. I'm telling y'all, it's going to be a great community event. It's going to have great deals. Do not miss this opportunity. There's also going to be free food. There's going to be music. There's going to be games. Make sure you guys, you go to the organization, you go to the event, you guys have fun. It's going to be a great event with great deals. Don't miss out on it. And with that being said, I just want to again say, hope y'all enjoyed the content. Hope y'all had a great day. Hope y'all guys got something that's in your life that makes you happy, makes you smile. God bless. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.